Hey y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about what through hiking on a restrictive diet looks like. First, I want to tell y'all about my experience through hiking on a restrictive diet, specifically on the Arizona Trail, which I just completed a couple of months ago. But since my experience was a little bit different than what a normal through hike looks like, I also want to give some tips for people who are going to do the more traditional through hike unsupported. Thankfully, before I got started prepping for my through hike of the Arizona Trail, I have already dealt with backpacking on shorter trips on a restrictive diet. Several years ago, I did the autoimmune protocol diet where you have to eliminate a whole lot of things that can be inflammatory to the body. And I went backpacking during that time, so I had to figure out how to make that work. So I did already have some experience and had done some research into this, so I should mention that. For those of y'all who don't know, my mom supported me while I was on my AZT through hike because I was still breastfeeding my son and I didn't want to be away from my baby that long. So she and I and my son drove out to Arizona together, and she supported me along the trail, just staying at different Airbnbs as I moved north. When I started my through hike of the Arizona Trail, my restrictions were no beef or pork, so only chicken and fish, no soy, no dairy, so butter and cheese is out, and no eggs. Now, these restrictions were due to my son who has cow's milk protein allergy. We discovered that the hard way. He screamed for like 4 or 5 months, being just extremely colicky, until I was able to eliminate those things from my diet, and therefore my breast milk stopped affecting him negatively. Thankfully, I was able to bring red meat back during my hike, and that was amazing. That helped a lot. But anyway, let's talk about how I made these restrictions work. Because we were road tripping out there and back, I knew I'd have to eat at restaurants along the way, or it would be more convenient to do that. So the first thing I did was check the allergen menus ahead of time of different restaurants that we might pass through along the way. It's a lot easier to check with chains. Most people who are on a restrictive diet probably already know a lot of the different chains that they can eat at. So this might not be something that you really have to plan for. But for me, being at home with a colicky baby for several months after he was born, I didn't go out and about, dining at restaurants very often. So this was something that I kind of had to learn for making the road trip out to Arizona. But the next thing that I had to do was make sure that I had snacks and backup meals ready in case we stayed at a motel in some map dot town that didn't have chain restaurants, because that happens sometimes. Or maybe the only thing that was open when we got to a specific town would be fast food, and that would just be a no-go. So having those snacks that I could eat, not rely on picking something up at a gas station, and having, pre-packaged meals that I could use my backpacking stove to boil water and fix at the motel that we stayed at was very helpful. For the through hike itself, I had to make sure that I had at least a few weeks of food and snacks, and this is for like the trail days and 0 days. Make sure that I was covered, because we might go to, like I said, little towns that the only resupply point for groceries is a Dollar General. So I needed to know that I had something that I could eat while on trail without having a good resupply point for foods that I could actually eat, and then, having food to eat at the Airbnbs on the days that I was off, spending time with my mom and my son. Thankfully, mom could just kind of eat whatever, a frozen TV dinner if she had to. Thankfully, I had a vehicle that had a big old luggage storage thingy up on the top, and we had, space, of course, in the back, and we were staying at Airbnbs, so I had a lot more space than a typical through hiker would to store this bulk of food that I prepared beforehand, and then, would either order or pick up along the way. But after each stretch, I definitely had to kind of re-inventory, see if there were things that I needed to order ahead of time, because it's not like I could just necessarily go to the Kroger and pick up what I needed. I sometimes was in small towns, like I said, that had markets that were very limited, so staying ahead of it, checking after each stretch of trail, and kind of doing inventory to figure out what I needed to order to maybe even the next Airbnb, depending on how long it would take. So it just took a lot of constant management and inventory throughout the through hike. So really the big answers to through hiking on a restrictive diet, whether you're being supported or you're doing it the traditional unsupported way, is number one, planning. Look ahead at town stops before you go, kind of get a feel for what restaurants are going to be there, what grocery stores do. Those grocery stores and restaurants typically offer things that you can eat. You can always call ahead and ask, and you can look at different resources for different trails. Most long distance trails have either a trail app like Far Out that details some of the resupply information, or they have a guidebook that you can check out. But you know, it's just going to be scoping this stuff out ahead of time, make a list of the different trail stops, and figure out, you know, where you're going to stop and what options you'll have there. And if you want to err on the side of safety, you can always just plan to get a resupply box at each of those stops. Now, for a resupply box, typically you'll receive that general delivery at the local post office, but there are sometimes local businesses that do accept hiker resupply boxes, and sometimes for a small fee. Scope out pre-packaged meals. If you haven't done this before, there are a lot of companies that make freeze-dried meals that cater to people with food allergies. Some of the ones that I know of are Heather's Choice, Good To Go Meals, and Wild Zora. I've eaten foods from each of those. This is the simplest option for finding something that will work for you and you don't have to put a whole lot of time and effort into it. Might not be the most budget-friendly option, but again, the simplest if you can find something that works with your diet. Next, consider prepping your own meals. Now, the easiest way to do this is to have a freeze dryer, but that's like the least budget-friendly option out there probably, unless you're going to be making a lot of freeze-dried foods like going forward in the future. I got my freeze dryer to freeze dry breast milk, but it's great to have for backpacking too. It was easy to make some soups and just freeze dry those to have for town stops, especially along the way. And I also ate some of them on the trail. You can also consider a dehydrator. You're more limited on the types of meats that you can dehydrate. Like I would only feel comfortable with beef and maybe venison, but a dehydrator is going to be a lot cheaper than a freeze dryer, and you can do fruits and vegetables too. But you can also buy individual ingredients like in bulk that are freeze dried, so you could get like a big old can of freeze dried chicken or beef and just get the different components and make your own backpacking meals in Mylar bags and pop in an oxygen absorber and then seal it up. I would recommend also having some sort of fat or carb supplementation to kind of help up your calories. A lot of times people who are going backpacking end up needing more calories than what they expect, but especially if you're on a restrictive diet, it may be harder to hit that caloric intake that you really need. So I tried to do things like add honey to my oatmeal and my coffee every morning. I got packets of collagen powder to put in my coffee, and I also had olive oil packets that I put in every meal that I cooked. So just those little things can actually help you get more calories. I still finished the Arizona Trail looking like a skeleton, but I think that was more due to breastfeeding and through hiking than just the through hiking on a restrictive diet. And finally, I think that it's important to try whatever you're going to package up for yourself before you go. A lot of times as through hikers, we have these ideas that one, we'll want to eat the same thing over and over. So you might want to throw in a little variety, but that something that we don't particularly care for in town, we'll magically love it on the trail just because we'll be so hungry that we'll want to eat it. But that's not always the case. Like there have been times where there's stuff in my food bag that I'm like, I'd rather be hungry and then just get to town than eat this thing. So before you end up making a huge batch of something that you end up not being a fan of, try it out before you go. It would be real unfortunate to discover you dislike something that you have waiting for you for 100 miles of resupplies. I know that the idea of through hiking on a restrictive diet can be overwhelming, but man, if I can figure it out, y'all can do this. And for folks who haven't been watching this channel for 10 years, or those who might not remember, I actually interviewed a couple about 10 years ago or so that had through hiked a long distance trail vegan. Now, it was probably much more difficult to do that back then, and they were able to do it. So it's something that people do successfully do. So where there's a will, there's a way. For anybody who has successfully thru-hiked on a restrictive diet and you've got other tips, or you want to share what your restrictions were and how you were able to navigate that, please feel free to share that in the comments below, because it could really help somebody who's kind of holding back strictly because of their dietary restrictions. So thank y'all so much for watching. If you found this video useful, don't forget to share it with a friend, and we will see y'all next time.